ShootingUSA.com, your resource for firearms news and information.
There are guns that are famous, like the M1 Garand, because millions of soldiers took them to war. And then there are guns made famous by who owned them. In the case of General George S. Patton, he both commanded big guns and carried big guns as his personal signature. You can hardly hear his name without also hearing the thunderous report of big guns. General George S. Patton was the most famous American tank commander of World War II, the most famous tank commander ever in American history. Patton was a leader with a reputation for courage, for boldness, even for brashness. In what is surely one of the most famous scenes in American movie history, actor George C. Scott in the movie Patton portrays the general's unique ability to motivate his troops.
We are advancing constantly, and we're not interested in holding on to anything except the enemy. We're going to hold on to him by the nose, and we're going to kick him in the ass.
His fiery language is not the only Patton trademark obvious in the scene. On his hip, he carries a Model 27 Smith & Wesson double-action revolver, a .357 Magnum, complete with Patton's signature ivory grips.
I have Patton's Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum, which he bought in Hawaii in 1935. He ordered it from Smith & Wesson. They delivered it there.
Charles Lemons is curator of the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and he is holding Patton's actual .357, not the movie gun. The museum is home to dozens of tanks, to Patton's Army staff car, his helmet and holster, and of course to several of the general's firearms, including the .357 Magnum.
We always consider this a very well-known piece of history. Truthfully, I'm always afraid of dropping it.
This historic piece is Smith & Wesson's serial number 47022. Patton paid $60 for this blued revolver with a 3.5-inch barrel.
What's interesting to me is that he went and bought, at the time, the most powerful handgun in the world.
Charles believes it speaks volumes that the general owned what was at the time the world's most powerful sidearm. Patton called it his killing gun. The curator says Patton was sending a message.
Don't mess with me. Truthfully, don't mess with me. I personally wouldn't want to get into a pistol match with him. He's a deadly shot.
Message received. And Charles says it is likewise no coincidence this revolver is fitted with ivory grips, grips engraved with the general's initials. It is all part of Patton's mystique.
It does have the ivory grips, although he didn't buy it that way from Smith & Wesson. He added, and then he had the GSP engraved on it.
The general was never one to walk softly, but he clearly liked to carry a big stick. Charles also points to the excellent condition of the .357 Magnum.
It's in very good shape. Patton liked to keep his weapons in very good condition. And so when it arrived, it only has the minor scuffing you would have as you carry it in the holster.
There are other Patton sidearms in the museum, including his silver-plated Colt 45 single-action Peacemaker, also with ivory grips. These guns became so famous in America, they were even the topic of reporters' questions, as the movie Patton demonstrates.
Well, the people at home are interested in you, General. They're curious about your pearl-handled revolvers.
They're ivory. Only a pimp from a cheap New Orleans whorehouse would carry a pearl-handled pistol.
These rare photos from the Patton collection picture the general with his 1911 pistol on his hip, again with distinctive ivory grips. Then later, after the war is over, at a ticker tape parade in his honor, the general is also armed with a semi-auto. Patton rarely carried a semi-auto and was photographed wearing one even less. but he owned many kinds of guns.
Oh yes, his pistols and weapons go far beyond just the two that we know about. He owned 45s, he owned 22s, you name it, he probably had a shot at it.
Charles Lemon says Patton was almost never without a concealed firearm. If he had two visible, then he was carrying three. One in the holster meant he was carrying two. And if the general appeared unarmed, well, you shouldn't bet on it. Well, coming up, the general's most famous sidearm is Magnificent Colt.
You're watching Shooting USA, America's #1 source for firearms news and information.
The single-action Army 45 is one of history's most famous firearms. It is often credited with winning the West. But I'm betting there is no peacemaker better known than the one that fought a different war as the sidearm of General George S. Patton. That's now one of history's guns. The remarkable sidearm was on Patton's hip as he led the invasion of North Africa in 1942. It was in the general's holster as he routed the 10th Panzer Division, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in 1943. It was at his side as Patton came ashore on the beaches of Sicily, and as he cheered the men of his 7th Army in the liberation of Palermo. This famous revolver went to battle again and again in World War II as the favorite sidearm of the legendary General George S. Patton.
This is the icon. If you don't think anything else about Patton, this is one of the pieces that you think about. It's an absolutely beautiful piece.
It is indeed a beautiful piece, truly magnificent. This is Patton's Model 1873 Colt single-action Army revolver. But this is not just any peacemaker. This one is meticulously engraved on the frame, on the barrel, on the trigger guard and cylinder. It is full coverage engraving. It is also dramatically silver-plated with custom ivory grips installed at the factory.
He bought it from Colt with the grips and with the silver plating, but not the engraving. We had Colt take a look at it, and yes, they did say this is the way they sold it according to their records.
The left grip is carved with our national symbol, clutching a shield in its talons. The right grip etched with Patton's initials, GSP. Lieutenant George Patton paid $50 in 1916 for serial number 332088.
Some unknown engraver, because we don't know who did it, did the very fine engraving on the inside and also added the small GSP, which became his hallmark on a lot of his weapons.
Today, it's still as handsome a firearm as you may ever see. Patton bought his Colt when he was assigned to the U.S. 10th Cavalry. He was part of a punitive action on the Mexican border against the outlaw Pancho Villa. Patton came home with 2 notches in the grips.
He shot and killed 2 Villistas with his pistol. And in doing so, like any good Western man, he cut notches into the pistol.
Years later, this Colt was again Patton's sidearm as his famed Third Army invaded Europe, breaking the back of the Nazi aggressors and freeing the people of France. Even today, soldiers know its history and can barely take their eyes off this famous firearm when they see it in the museum.
It's just a beautiful weapon and such history in my hands.
The sergeant walked by while the revolver was out of its case, and he could not believe he got to hold it.
I have to savor this moment because I don't think I'll ever get this chance again. I was just in the right place at the right time today.
To his soldiers, Patton was old blood and guts. To millions, he was a hero, brash and flamboyant, larger than life, an image his Colt helped create, with its silver plating and the notches in the ivory grips.